Have you ever felt like your own children are slowly drifting away, or worse, that they no longer value? You poured your whole heart into raising them, yet now you're left wondering, what did I do wrong? That feeling really stings, doesn't it? But listen up. Getting angry or sinking into sorrow won't fix a thing. In this video, I'm going to reveal 8 smart steps to help you reclaim your peace, dignity, and even respect from your kids, all without sparking an argument. These are tested methods that have helped many elderly parents in America mend broken bonds with their children. From Mr. Henry staying calm by Lake Zorinsky to Mrs. Alice painting in Portland. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. After feeling the pain of distance from your children, we come to the first step. Don't react in anger. Let me tell you about Mr. Henry Brooks, a retired teacher living in Lincoln, Nebraska. Henry, 72, was once a devoted dad who spent hours teaching his son Jack how to throw a baseball in the backyard, or sat with him at the kitchen table doing math homework on cold winter nights. But now Jack, 38, lives in Denver, Colorado, working as a software engineer. George rarely calls home. The brief calls every few months usually end with a casual tone, as if Jack's just checking a box. Henry felt his heart tighten every time he stared at the silent phone on the table. One Saturday morning in October, as golden leaves blanketed the street outside, Sir Henry sat in his small kitchen, clutching a cold cup of coffee. He just called Jack to invite him home for his birthday dinner, but all he got was a short text. "Too busy, Dad. Maybe next time." Anger surged in his chest. "After everything I've done for you, you don't even care about me anymore," he muttered, gripping the phone, his trembling finger hovering over the call button to unleash his frustration. But then he stopped. He recalled the times he'd lost his temper with students in class, how yelling only pushed them further away. He sighed, set the phone down, and chose to do something else. Henry slipped on an old wool coat, put on a baseball cap, and stepped out of his little wooden house, its planks weathered by time. He walked to Lake Zorinsky, a peaceful spot a few blocks away, where he used to take Jack fishing. The autumn breeze carried the scent of damp earth and rustling leaves. He sat on a wooden bench by the water, watching ducks glide across the sunlit surface. In that quiet moment, memories flooded back. He remembered the day 10-year-old Jack shouted with glee, after catching his first fish, a tiny perch he refused to release. He recalled Jack's beaming smile, and the clumsy hug he gave as they brought their trophy home to show Mom. Those memories still felt alive, even though Jack was far away now. Sitting there, Henry realized something. His worth didn't hinge on whether Jack called. He'd lived a meaningful life. 35 years teaching, hundreds of students who still remembered him as a dedicated mentor, and days as a father, imperfect but full of love. He smiled faintly, the anger fading like thin smoke in the chilly air. "Even if Jack forgets me, I'm still Henry Brooks, the dad, the teacher, the man who gave his all," he told himself. He stood, took a deep breath, and walked home feeling lighter than ever. On the way back, he stopped by Mrs. Mary's little grocery store, the retired neighbor. She greeted him with a warm smile. "You look brighter than usual today, Henry." He shared a bit about Jack, not to complain, but just to talk. Mary nodded. "Sometimes kids need time to figure it out. Don't force them. Just live your life well." Her words reinforced his choice. He bought a loaf of toast and some apples, feeling like he was starting a new day, instead of drowning in old sorrows. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. Jack called, not to apologize or explain, just to check in. "How are you, Dad? The grandkid mentioned Grandpa today, wants to meet you." Jack's voice wasn't dismissive anymore. It had a hint of warmth. Henry didn't bring up the times he'd been ignored, just smiled and said, "I'm good, Jack. Bring the little one over when you can. I'll teach him to throw a ball." The call lasted longer than usual, and as he hung up, Henry felt a spark of hope flicker. He wasn't sure what shifted Jack. Maybe the boy sensed his dad's silence wasn't giving up, but a quiet strength. Mr. Henry Brooks' story in Lincoln, Nebraska, isn't just touching. It's a profound lesson in facing distance from our kids. He chose not to lash out when Jack didn't return his affection, and it slowly started mending their bond. But why doesn't anger work? Let's dig deeper to understand. First, anger is a natural response to hurt. When kids ignore or disrespect us, it's like a knife to a parent's pride. Henry nearly called Jack back to vent. How can you treat me like this after all I've done? Anyone in his shoes might feel the same. But what if he had? Anger often spills into harsh words that leave permanent scars. Jack might have felt attacked, gone on the defensive, or even cut contact entirely. The gap between them wouldn't close, it'd widen. Take another example to see this clearly. Mr. Tom, a dad in Columbus, Ohio, faced the same thing. His daughter Lisa rarely came home after moving to Chicago for work. One day, when she brushed off a dinner invite over the phone, Tom couldn't hold back and yelled, "All you care about is your job. Am I nothing to you?" Lisa hung up, and for a whole year she didn't call. Tom thought venting would make her see her mistake, but it only drove her further away. Anger isn't a bridge back to your kids. It's fuel on a fire, burning what little connection remains. By contrast, Henry's approach showed a better way. Choosing a walk by Lake Zorinsky over a showdown with Jack, he guarded his dignity and kept communication open. That calm sent a silent message. I'm here, but I won't beg for your attention. That self-control made Jack, even if not right away, rethink things. His sudden call, "How are you, Dad?" The grandkid mentioned Grandpa, wasn't random. It came because Henry didn't let negativity rule, refusing to turn pain into a fight. Psychologically, anger triggers a fight or flight response in others. Yelling or criticizing can make kids flee, avoid you to escape the stress. But staying calm creates a safe space where they can ease back without fear of judgment. Henry did that. He didn't demand Jack change on the spot. He just lived his life quietly, letting Jack feel the void in his own actions. The takeaway here is plain. Anger won't win back the respect or closeness you crave. It just costs you more. Instead, do what Henry did. Pause, reflect, and remember your worth isn't tied to how your kids treat you. Staying calm doesn't just protect you. It opens the door for your relationship to heal. That's the power of this first step. Now that we know anger only pushes kids further away, let's move to step 2, rebuild your life. When you feel abandoned, don't sit waiting for them to come back. Rediscover your own joy and purpose. Let me tell you about Mrs. Margaret Evans, a 68-year-old widow in Raleigh, North Carolina. Margaret was once a mom who gave everything, working double shifts at the local textile mill to put her daughter Sarah and son David through college. But now Sarah lives in Atlanta as a lawyer, and David's in Raleigh, but rarely stops by. Her small home, with dusty family photos on the shelf, became a place of stifling silence. One spring afternoon, Margaret sat in her old armchair in the living room, gazing out the window at the front yard. The phone stayed quiet. Sarah hadn't called in 3 months, and David only texted a few words at Easter. "Hope you're good, Mom. Super busy." She felt hollow, like the world had forgotten her. "I gave my whole life for them, and now I'm just a shadow to them," she wondered. The sadness weighed heavy, but then she recalled Mr. Henry Brooks, someone she'd heard about at a seniors church group, who said, "Don't wait for others to make you happy." She resolved to stop moping. Margaret got up and walked to the backyard, a small patch of weeds she'd neglected since her husband passed 5 years ago. She found an old packet of sunflower seeds in the shed, left from the last time she and 12-year-old Sarah planted together. With shaky hands, she tilled the soil, sowed the seeds, and watered them. In the days that followed, she spent hours out there, pulling weeds, planting tomatoes and lettuce. The smell of damp earth, morning bird song, and warm sun on her shoulders brought her back to life. Gardening wasn't just a hobby, it became her new passion. One day, she took a basket of fresh tomatoes to the local gardening club in Raleigh, which she joined after spotting a flyer at the supermarket. New friends there, Susan with her silver hair, and Carl with his gentle smile, welcomed her warmly. They swapped seeds, shared planting tips, and held outdoor tea sessions. Margaret started laughing more, her eyes lighting up as she talked about her soon-to-bloom sunflowers. She wasn't glued to the phone anymore. She was busy living her own life. Then one day, something surprising happened. Sarah called. "Mom, I heard from the neighbors your garden's amazing. How are you?" "I'm thinking of visiting." Sarah's voice wasn't rushed anymore. It held curiosity and warmth. Margaret smiled over the phone. I'm good, honey. The garden's full of sunflowers now. You'd love taking pictures if you came. The call lasted longer than usual, and a few weeks later, Sarah drove from Atlanta. Stepping into the backyard, she froze at the sight of towering golden sunflowers. "Mom, I can't believe you did this," she said, hugging her tight. They sat on the porch, sipping tea and catching up on life, something they hadn't done in years. Sarah started visiting more often, not out of guilt, but because Margaret was now a radiant, vibrant mom. She wasn't the woman waiting by the phone. She was an independent woman thriving in her passion. David noticed too. One time, he dropped by unannounced with a small potted plant as a gift. "Mom, you're a gardening pro now. I've got to learn from you." Mrs. Margaret Evans' story in Raleigh, North Carolina, isn't just about rediscovering joy. It's proof of the power of living fully. She turned the pain of being ignored by her kids into fuel to rebuild her life. And as a result, Sarah and David came back on their own. But why does living a full life shift how your kids see you? Let's break it down. First off, when you focus on yourself and find purpose again, you change your vibe. Margaret used to be the mom waiting by the phone, eyes sad and voice tinged with disappointment. But once she started gardening, joined the club, and laughed with new friends, she radiated fresh energy. That shift wasn't just in what she did, it was in the confidence and independence she showed. Sarah picked up on it through her mom's voice on the phone, and when she visited, she saw a woman who didn't need her kids' attention to feel whole. A mom living fully becomes magnetic. No one wants to miss out on someone buzzing with positive energy. Look at another case to see this. Mrs. Linda, a widow in Austin, Texas, used to spend hours griping about her kids not visiting. But one day, she signed up for a painting class at the community center. At first, it was just to pass time, but soon she was hooked on brushing strokes across paper. She hung paintings around her house, gave some to friends, and even sold a few at the local market. Her son Mark heard friends talk about this senior artist and stopped by. He was stunned to see his mom wasn't the fragile woman he remembered. She was a proud painter now. Mark started calling more, not from duty, but because he genuinely wanted to connect. Living fully made Linda someone worth noticing. Psychologically, people are drawn to those with purpose and joy. When Margaret planted sunflowers and spoke about them with excitement, she stopped being the mom who needed her kids to feel valued. Instead, she became a role model, a strong, independent, happy woman. That sparked curiosity and admiration in Sarah and David. They didn't come back out of guilt. They wanted to be part of the vibrant life their mom had built. It's not an instant fix, but it's natural and lasts longer than forcing or blaming. Compared to Mr. Henry Brooks earlier, Margaret took it a step further. She didn't just stay calm, she acted to refresh her life. Henry held his dignity with quiet reflection, while Margaret actively created new joy. Both worked, but Margaret's way shows that living for yourself doesn't just preserve respect, it pulls others closer. Kids often mirror their parents' attitudes. If you're down and desperate, they might pull away. If you're happy and self-reliant, they'll want in. The lesson from Margaret is clear. Don't wait for your kids to define your worth. Find a purpose, gardening, painting, anything that makes you smile, and live it fully. When you do, you don't just rediscover yourself, you become someone your kids can't overlook. That's the strength of this second step. We've seen how staying calm and living fully can transform relationships with our children, through Mr. Henry and Mrs. Margaret. Now let's move to step 3, skillful communication. When your kids grow distant, how you talk to them can be the key to bringing them closer without sparking conflict. Let me tell you the story of Mr. William Carter, a retired carpenter, 70 years old, living in Asheville, North Carolina. William was once a proud father. He handcrafted the kitchen table, where he and his son Michael would sit together, eating cornbread and chatting about fishing trips along the French Broad River. But now Michael, 42, is married and works as a restaurant manager in Charlotte, a 2-hour drive from Asheville. Visits became rare, and the phone stayed silent for months. The last time they spoke was at Christmas, when Michael rushed through a 5-minute call before hanging up due to work being busy. William felt left behind, a father who was once the center of his son's life now just a faded memory. One fall evening, As the red sunset glow spread over the Blue Ridge Mountains outside his window, William sat by the old wooden table, holding a cold coffee mug. He stared at the phone on the table and felt anger rising. Sheesh. Why doesn't that boy ever call? Doesn't he know how much I miss him? He wanted to call Michael right then to yell, "Do you even see me as your dad anymore?" But then he paused. He remembered Mrs. Margaret, whom he'd met at a seniors church group meeting, and how she found joy again, instead of blaming her kids. He told himself, if anger doesn't work, I've got to try something else. Compared to the earlier steps, skillful communication is a bigger leap. Mr. Henry stayed calm to protect his dignity. Mrs. Margaret lived fully to draw attention, but William actively used words to build a bridge. All three avoid conflict, but William's way stands out because it directly reaches his child's emotions. The letter wasn't just a note. It was an invisible thread pulling Michael closer, stronger than any reprimand. This shows the power of words. They can heal or destroy, depending on how you wield them. The lesson from William is clear. When your kids drift away, don't let disappointment steer your words. Instead of blaming, "Why don't you call me?" try saying, "I miss you, Dad," or "Mom's always here when you need me." Those phrases not only preserve your dignity, but plant seeds for your kids to rethink. Gentle words aren't weakness. They're the strength of patience and love. As William proved, a soft letter can do what a dozen shouts never could. That's the value of this third step. We've gone through staying calm, living fully, and communicating skillfully to improve ties with our kids. Now, let's move to step 4, setting healthy boundaries. Respect is a two-way street, and sometimes you need to protect your dignity by saying no. Let me tell you about Mrs. Clara Thompson, a retired nurse, 74 years old, living in Savannah, Georgia. Clara was once a mother always ready for her son. With 40 years as a nurse, she was used to putting others' needs first. She spent her life raising her son Daniel, now 45, a construction engineer in Savannah. She sacrificed her dream of traveling to get Daniel through college, often working overtime to cover tuition. But now, Daniel only visits when he needs something, money for car repairs, babysitting, or just to vent after a tough workday. Clara always stepped up, hoping it'd make Daniel value her more. But over time, his demands grew unreasonable. He'd show up unannounced, expecting her to watch the kids for hours, then leave without a thank you.
One humid Saturday morning in Savannah's summer heat, Daniel knocked on Clara's door.
Her little house, with its porch full of wisteria, was usually peaceful, but not today. "Mom, I need you to watch the kids this afternoon," Daniel said, his tone curt, phone in hand. "I've got a last-minute meeting." Clara looked at him. No greeting, no care. She was about to agree, as always. But then she recalled Mr. William Carter, whom she'd heard about at a seniors group. You can't let others define your worth. This time she chose to change. Clara took a deep breath, stood tall, and said, "Daniel, I love you, but I'm not free today. I've got plans for myself." Her voice was gentle but firm. Daniel looked up, surprised, even a bit annoyed. What plans? You're just at home," he snapped. Clara smiled faintly. "I'm taking a yoga class, and joining a book club. I need time for me." Daniel frowned, but said nothing more, walking off with a puzzled look. In the days after, Clara held her boundaries. She turned down sudden requests, only helping when asked ahead, and treated with respect. At first, Daniel was mad. He called less, even texted, "You've changed, Mom. Not like before." But she didn't waver. She joined a yoga class at the community center, feeling her body stretch under sunlight, streaming through the windows. She went to the book club, debating new novels with friends like Jane, a retired teacher. She reconnected with old nursing pals, hosting afternoon coffees. Her life filled with color, no longer revolving around Daniel. Slowly, Daniel noticed the shift. One day he stopped by, not to ask for anything, but with a bunch of wildflowers. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said, voice low. "I didn't see how selfish I'd been." "You look happier now." Clara hugged him, relieved. I just want us to respect each other, Daniel. From then on, he asked before needing help, and always thanked her. He even invited her to dinner with his family, something rare before. Clara didn't just protect her own peace. She taught Daniel how to treat her. He began to see her as a strong woman, not just a mother always ready to sacrifice. Once, when she visited, Daniel laughed. "Mom, I have to schedule with you like a meeting with my boss." She smiled back. "That's what respect is, son." The story of Mrs. Clara Thompson in Savannah, Georgia, is a clear testament to the power of setting healthy boundaries. When she refused to be an unconditional servant to Daniel, she not only reclaimed her peace, but also made him change how he treated her. But why is setting boundaries so effective? The answer lies in one word: self-respect. Let's dive deeper to understand this. First, self-respect is the foundation of every healthy relationship. When Clara always agreed to Daniel's every request, watching the kids, giving money, listening to him vent, she unintentionally sent the message that she was okay with being disrespected. Daniel wasn't deliberately selfish, but he got used to his mom always putting him first, to the point it felt natural. When she said no, and made time for yoga or book club, she affirmed that her worth wasn't tied to pleasing others. This forced Daniel to reconsider. Mom wasn't just a servant, but an individual with her own life, deserving of respect. Take another example to see it clearer. Mr. Paul, a father in Tucson, Arizona, once faced a similar situation. His daughter Emily often asked him to fix her car or watch the house without notice. He always agreed, thinking it kept her close. But when he started refusing sudden requests, "I've got a cooking class today. You'll need to find someone else." Emily was annoyed at first, but then she shifted. She called ahead to ask, and even invited him to dinner, to say thanks. When Paul set boundaries, he didn't just protect his time, he taught Emily to respect him. Self-respect changed how she saw him, from a serving dad to a dad worth honoring. Psychologically, people only respect those who respect themselves. When Clara stood firm with her boundaries, she didn't just preserve her dignity, she sent the message, "I deserve to be treated well." This woke Daniel up. He realized if he didn't change, he might lose closeness with her. If she'd kept giving in, Daniel would never have seen the need to adjust his behavior. But when she set limits, he had to rethink. And from there, respect became mutual. Boundaries aren't selfishness, they're how you teach others to love you properly. Compared to the earlier steps, setting boundaries is more proactive. Mr. Henry stayed calm to avoid conflict. Mrs. Margaret lived fully to draw her kids in. Mr. William communicated gently to open hearts, but Clara went further, by directly demanding respect. She didn't wait for Daniel to change on his own. She made him face her worth. This approach isn't easy. It takes consistency and courage to say no to someone you love. But that very consistency turned her from a taken-for-granted mom into a revered one. The lesson from Clara is clear. Self-respect is the key to building a balanced relationship with your kids. Setting boundaries doesn't mean pushing them away. It's how you pull them closer the right way. When you honor your time, energy, and feelings, you teach your kids to do the same. Clara didn't need to argue or beg. She just stood firm and lived true to her worth. The result was a better relationship, where both sides were respected. That's the strength of this fourth step. We've walked through 4 powerful steps: staying calm, living fully, communicating skillfully, and setting healthy boundaries. Now let's move to step 5, being a good example. Sometimes how you live and act is the most effective way to teach your kids to respect you. Let me tell you about Mr. George Alvarez, a retired factory worker, 76 years old, living in Tulsa, Oklahoma. George was once the backbone of his family. With calloused hands from 40 years at the oil refinery, he raised 3 kids, Maria, Luis, and Sophia, to adulthood. He taught them to ride bikes in the nearby park, fixed their cars as teens, and never missed their soccer games. He remembered summer evenings when the family gathered around the table, laughing over his grilled meat. But now Maria, 48, lives in Dallas as a teacher. Luis, 45, is in Tulsa, but busy as a technician. And Sophia, 42, is in Oklahoma City, swamped with 2 little kids. Visits dwindled, and when they came they were glued to their phones, giving him short answers before rushing off. One winter afternoon, As cold winds swept the barren fields around Tulsa, George sat in his small living room by the crackling fireplace. He just called Maria to invite her for Thanksgiving dinner, but she said, "I'm swamped with lesson plans, Dad. Maybe next year." Louise texted, "Kitty, gotta work overtime this weekend." Sophia called briefly, "The kids are sick, sorry Dad." George set the phone down, feeling empty. He wondered, what did I do wrong that they don't need me anymore? But instead of getting mad or sad, he recalled Mrs. Clara Thompson, whom he'd met at a seniors group, and how she held her dignity by living her values. He decided not to beg for attention, but to show his kids through example. George stood, stepped onto the porch, and gazed at the gray sky. He thought, if they won't come, I'll live well for myself, and let them see it. He started small. Each morning, he tidied the backyard, sweeping dry leaves and fixing the fence loose in summer. He cooked a pot of beef soup, Louise's favorite, and took some to Mr. Tom, an elderly neighbor living alone. Tom smiled. "George, you're making me miss my mom." George just grinned. "Take it easy, Tom. I made plenty." He kept a positive attitude. When Louise dropped by one evening for tools, George greeted him with a warm smile. "Great to see you, Louise. Come in for coffee with me." Louise hesitated, but sat down. George didn't mention the absences, just asked, "How's work? You doing okay?" Louise opened up about shop stress, and George listened, nodding, offering gentle advice. As Louise left, he said, "Thanks, Dad. It's been a while since we sat like this." A few days later, Maria called. "Kitty, Louise says your soup's amazing. Can I come this weekend?" George laughed. "You're welcome anytime." Sophia texted, "I've sorted it. I'll bring the kids to see Grandpa." That weekend, George's house rang with laughter again. He taught his grandson to throw a ball, like he did with Louise, and Sophia snapped photos, saying Grandpa's the best. He didn't demand attention, but by living kindly and patiently, he became a model his kids wanted to follow. From then on, they visited more, not just for holidays, but to sit by the fire and hear his old stories. Maria once said, "Dad, you make everything so easy. I want to be like you."
Mr.
George Alvarez's story in Tulsa, Oklahoma, shows the power of being a good example. He didn't blame Maria, Louise, or Sophia for drifting away. He chose kindness and patience, and they came back on their own. But why can actions inspire so strongly? Let's dig deeper to understand. First, actions speak louder than words. When George welcomed Louise with a smile and hot coffee instead of griping about missed visits, he didn't need to say, "I want you to respect me." His actions, listening, caring, staying positive, sent a clear message. "I'm worth your regard." Louise felt that warmth and wanted to stay longer. If George had criticized, Louise might have left fast, carrying guilt or irritation. But kind actions planted seeds for change, making him reconnect willingly. Look at another example for clarity. Mrs. Helen, a mom in Lansing, Michigan, was once down when her kids rarely visited. Instead of nagging, she volunteered at a local soup kitchen, cooking for the homeless. She didn't tell her kids, but one day, her daughter Rachel spotted her photo on the group's social media. Rachel called instantly, "Mom, I didn't know you did something this great. I'm so proud." After that, Rachel and her brother visited often, not just to see her but to help cook. Helen's actions didn't beg for notice, yet they inspired her kids to see her anew, as a mom worth admiring and being near. Psychologically, people learn through watching. George didn't ask his kids to change. He lived his values: patience, kindness, independence. This stirred admiration in Maria, Louise, and Sophia. They saw he didn't wallow in sadness, but stayed the strong dad they knew, fixing fences, cooking soup, teaching grandkids ball. His actions were a mirror, making them wonder, if Dad's fine without us around, why aren't we spending time with him? The shift wasn't forced. It came from their natural desire to be close to someone admirable. Compared to prior steps, being a good example is the subtlest approach. Mr. Henry stayed calm to dodge fights. Mrs. Margaret lived fully to catch attention. Mr. William spoke softly to open hearts. Mrs. Clara set boundaries to demand respect. But George did. We've seen how financial independence can strengthen respect from children, through Mr. and Mrs. Davis. Now, Let's move to step 7. Forgive, but hold your value. When your kids hurt you, forgiveness is a way to heal, but you mustn't forget your own worth. Let me tell you the story of Mrs. Alice Harper, a retired painter, 71 years old, living in Portland, Oregon. Alice was once a mother full of artistic passion. She taught her daughter Lily how to mix colors on a canvas when she was just 5, in the sunlit little room of their Portland home. With 30 years as a freelance artist, she sacrificed many exhibition opportunities to raise Lily, from selling paintings at the local market to pay tuition, to staying up late painting portraits for extra income. But now Lily, 39, a journalist in Los Angeles, rarely calls. Phone conversations dwindled, and the last time they spoke, over a year ago, Lily canceled a visit at the last minute due to a tight deadline. Alice felt abandoned, as if her years of sacrifice meant nothing to her daughter anymore. One fall morning, as light rain fell outside the window, Alice sat in her old studio, staring at dusty paintings on the rack. She'd just called Lily to invite her for her birthday, but got only a text. "I'm so busy, Mom. Have a good one." Pain surged. She wanted to call back, yell, "Do you know what I've done for you?" But she stopped. She remembered Mr. and Mrs. Davis, whom she met at a seniors group, and how they held their dignity through independence. She told herself, "I can't let this sadness define me. I have to forgive, but also live for myself." Alice took a sheet of paper and wrote a short line to Lily. "I forgive you for this distance, and I'll always love you." She didn't send it right away. It was her way of releasing emotions. Then she returned to her old passion. She wiped down the easel, grabbed brushes and watercolors, and began painting a scene of the Columbia Gorge pine forest, where she once walked with Lily. The sound of the brush on paper, the scent of watercolor in the air, and the faint light through the window made her feel alive again. Painting wasn't just a hobby. It was how she reclaimed her value. She took her art to a community exhibition in Portland. New friends like Mr. Henry, a sculptor, praised her talent. She displayed the pine forest painting, and it sold on the first day. She didn't sit waiting for Lily anymore. She was busy with colors, art talks, and her own life. Alice still thought of Lily, but the pain no longer weighed heavy. She'd forgiven, not to forget, but to heal. Then one day, Lily showed up unexpectedly. She drove from Los Angeles, standing at the door with red eyes. "Mom, I saw your painting online. I didn't know you still painted. I'm sorry for forgetting you," she said, voice trembling. Alice hugged her, smiling. "I've forgiven you, Lily, but I had to live for me too." They sat in the studio, looking at a new painting, a field of wild flowers, and talked. Lily shared about work stress, feeling lost, and Alice listened, not judging. From then on, Lily visited more often. She brought a camera, snapped photos of her mom painting, and even wrote an article about her, the painter who found her light. But what brought Lily back wasn't guilt. It was admiration. Alice was no longer the waiting mother. She was a strong artist, living true to her value. Once Lily said, "Mom, you make me want to paint again like when I was little. You're amazing." Alice's story shows that forgiveness doesn't mean accepting hurt forever. She let go of the pain from Lily, but didn't let it define her. She held her value by living passionately. When you forgive yet stand firm, you don't just heal yourself, you inspire your kids to return. That's the lesson of this 7th step. We've seen how forgiving while holding value helped Mrs. Alice Harper rediscover herself and bring Lily back. Now let's move to step 8, building new friends. When your kids drift away, a circle of friends can ease loneliness and bring new joy. Let me tell you about Mr. Robert Sullivan, an 80-year-old widower living in Flagstaff, Arizona. Robert was once a devoted father and husband. With 35 years as a railroad engineer, he raised his son James and daughter Emily in a small mountain home in Flagstaff, where he'd tell tales of desert crossing trains. But after his wife passed 5 years ago, James, now 50, lives in Phoenix as a lawyer, and Emily, 47, in Tucson as a nurse, grew busier. Visits shortened. James called every few months, and Emily came only for holidays, with rushed check-ins before leaving. Robert felt the once lively house now echoed only with the wind through the pines outside. One winter morning, as light snow dusted the roof, Robert sat by the window gazing at the empty road. He'd just called James to check in, but "I'm in a meeting, Dad, later." "Okay." Emily texted, "Shifts are packed this weekend." "Sorry, Mom." Loneliness pressed hard. He'd leaned on his kids to fill the void since his wife's death, but now they were too busy. He wondered, will I live like this forever? But then he recalled Mrs. Alice Harper, whom he met at a seniors group, and how she found joy through art. He decided to stop waiting. Robert stepped outside, donning a thick coat and wool cap, and headed to the Flagstaff Community Center. He saw a flyer for a seniors club, offering morning coffee, book talks and walks. He didn't know what to expect, but walked in with a bit of hope. There, he met Mrs. Martha, a 78-year-old widow who loved funny stories, and Mr. Joe, an 82-year-old ex-pilot, always with an old book. They greeted him with warm smiles. "Robert, join us. The coffee's great today." He sat down, and for the first time in years, he laughed hard, as Martha recounted burning her kitchen by forgetting the stove. From then on, he was a regular. Wednesdays he joined coffee mornings, chatting about news or trains he once drove. Fridays he walked with the group at Buffalo Park, where fresh air and rustling leaves washed away his sadness. She even formed a small crew with Martha and Joe, picnicking at Lake Mary on weekends. He wasn't alone in the house anymore. He had friends who brought laughter and companionship. He still loved James and Emily, but he no longer relied on them to feel complete. Then one day, James called, "Dad, I heard from friends you're always picnicking. You okay?" Robert laughed. "I'm fine, son. I've got good friends. We fished last week." James was surprised. "You're that happy and famous, and didn't tell me." The next week, James drove from Phoenix, not out of duty, but curiosity. Robert took him to the club, introducing Martha and Joe. James grinned. "Dad, you've got a whole squad here. I'm glad you're not lonely." Emily visited later, bringing her little girl. "Grandpa, Mom says you've got new friends. I want to meet them," she said. Robert hosted a backyard gathering, where friends and family sat around a campfire. Emily looked at her dad. "You seem happier than before." "I worry less now." He just smiled. "I still love you kids, but I need friends too." Robert's story shows that building new friends doesn't just cut loneliness. It makes you more appealing to your kids. He didn't force James or Emily to stay close. He lived happily, and they returned, admiring his independence. With a friend circle, you don't just find joy, you build healthier ties with your kids. That's the lesson of this 8th step. We've journeyed through 8 amazing steps to reclaim dignity and respect when your kids grow distant or stop honoring you as before. From Mr. Robert Sullivan's story in Flagstaff, Arizona, we see how new friends bring joy and draw James and Emily back willingly. But this journey doesn't end here. Let's look back at all the stories to see the full picture and how you can apply them to your life. Start with Mr. Henry Brooks in Lincoln, Nebraska. When Jack didn't call back, he walked by Lake Serinsky instead of venting. That calm not only preserved his dignity, but paved the way for Jack's call with a touch of warmth. "How are you, Dad?" The grandkid misses Grandpa. Step 1, don't react in anger, is the base to keep from hurting yourself more. Then Mrs. Margaret Evans in Raleigh, North Carolina, turned sadness into action. She grew a sunflower garden, joined a gardening club, and lived so fully that Sarah and David couldn't help returning, awed by her new vitality. Living fully isn't just self-rescue, it's a magnet for your kids. Next, Mr. William Carter in Asheville, North Carolina. Instead of blaming Michael for silence, he wrote a gentle letter. "I miss our fishing days on the French Broad." Those skillful words touched Michael's heart, bringing him home with his little family. Communication doesn't have to be conflict. It can be a bridge of love. Then Mrs. Clara Thompson in Savannah, Georgia, set boundaries when Daniel demanded too much. She said no to guard her time, joining yoga and a book club, and Daniel learned to respect her. Self-respect isn't just protection. It teaches kids to love you right. Mr. George Alvarez in Tulsa, Oklahoma, showed us the power of being a good example. He welcomed Maria, Luis, and Sophia with kindness and patience, living positively despite their busyness. That inspired them to return, not just for holidays, but to sit by the fire with him. Being an example needs no words. It's a mirror of your value. Mr. and Mrs. Davis in Boise, Idaho, chose financial independence. They lived off pensions, refusing to be a bank for Laura and Tom, and soon their kids not only respected them, but sought money advice. Independence isn't just freedom. It makes you a model worth honoring. Mrs. Alice Harper in Portland, Oregon, forgave Lily for the distance, but didn't forget her worth. She painted, joined exhibitions, and lived passionately until Lily returned, writing an article about her. Forgiveness heals, but holding value keeps you steady. Finally, Mr. Robert Sullivan in Flagstaff, Arizona, built new friends through a seniors club. He stopped depending on James and Emily to fill his loneliness, and that drew them back, admiring his rich life. Picture a weekend afternoon in Boise, where Mr. and Mrs. Davis host a barbecue in their small yard. Laura and Tom bring their families, laughing at the table, asking their parents how to save like them. In Tulsa, George sits by the fire, telling old tales to Luis and Sophia as his grandkid plays at his feet. In Portland, Alice and Lily paint together in the studio, sunlight through the window lighting their smiles. In Flagstaff, Robert leads James, Emily, and friends on a Lake Mary picnic, laughter echoing through the pines. Back in Lincoln, Henry gets a birthday gift from Jack, a baseball inscribed, "To the best grandpa." All started small, but led to big changes. These stories aren't just hope. They're proof you can reclaim dignity and respect, no matter how far your kids drift. You don't need to beg or fight. You just need to act. Stay calm when hurt. Find your own joy. Speak gently, instead of angrily. Set boundaries when needed. Live as an example. Stand financially free. Forgive without losing value. And build a community around you. Each step is a brick rebuilding ties, not just with your kids, but with yourself. I want you to picture this. You're in your backyard, reading or gardening. The phone rings, and it's your kid, not out of duty, but because they want your voice. They visit, not because you asked, but because they admire you. That's what these 8 steps can do. Aging isn't waiting. It's a chance to shine, to prove your dignity is unshakable, no matter how anyone treats you. The stories of Henry, Margaret, William, Clara, George, the Davises, Alice, and Robert reflect life in the U.S. today, where fast paces and work pressure often pull kids away from aging parents. In modern America, with big cities like Denver or Los Angeles, where Jack and Lily live, the young get swept into jobs in their own families, easily overlooking parents in small towns like Lincoln or Portland. Henry stayed calm by Lake Zarinsky instead of raging at Jack, showing how older Americans can learn to manage emotions in an individualized society where conflict rarely solves issues. Margaret grew sunflowers in Raleigh, mirroring a trend of U.S. seniors finding personal hobbies like gardening or clubs to beat loneliness, a common struggle when 28% of those over 65 live alone, per Census Bureau 2023. William's letter to Michael in Asheville proves gentle communication still works in a digital age where short texts often replace deep connection. Clara's boundaries with Daniel in Savannah remind Americans of self-respect's importance in a culture valuing individuality. The Davises in Boise, financially independent, fit the reality of many retirees relying on 401ks and pensions, avoiding dependence on kids. The advice here is start small like George, cook soup for a neighbor, or join a community like Robert in Flagstaff. In America's diverse, busy society, holding dignity through specific acts like painting Alice or refusing unfair demands, Clara will help you not just live well but regain respect from your kids. Hit subscribe to explore more inspiring stories like Henry's and Alice's journeys. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video to keep reclaiming dignity.